folks. Welcome back inside the Parisi Palace, high above 2919 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show, hour number 2 here on a beautiful Saturday afternoon here in the Old Pueblo. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. My guest was born near the Mason-Dixon Line, but was close enough to Rock Creek Park that he sucked in all the sounds of mid-Atlantic America. The bluegrass of Chubby Wise and Bill Monroe. The bass lines of Richard Davis, Paul Chambers, and Jimmy Garrison. The soul sanctification of Wilson Pickett and Sam Cooke and Chuck Berry and the Little Richard rock beat. My guest studied and studied. By studying, I mean on the bandstand, getting comfortable, expressing himself at times like a melodic instrument while still locking the groove. He flew on an airplane to Wally Heider Studios, where they cranked out albums with the cagey Grace Slick, singing pop psych lyrics over the undulating bass of my guest. His crown of creation was jettisoning Jefferson and forming Hot Tuna with the biophile Jorma Kaukonen. They played duos or in trios or at the Fur Peace Ranch, just being themselves and staying as grounded as possible. My guest is in the same master bass discussion as Leland Sklar, the late great Jack Bruce, Philip Lesh, and Dave Holland. Live from the UK, Jack Casady, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Well, how are you doing? It's nice to talk with you. That's quite an introduction.
No, it's an honor, man, and thank you for. I'm glad we got those signals figured out, and it's really a treat to talk to you, Jack. I wanted you to talk to the audience about specifically the going to the Howard Theater and seeing who you would see there, and how impactful those venues were to the community and to the communal music that came out of the community.
Well, it was a fabulous. First of all, it was a fabulous opportunity for me, for any artist, any musician, a dancer, a musician, anybody in the creative field to be born and raised in Washington, D.C., which is truly the ethnic and crossroads of the very beginning of the United States, being settled by the Irish and the English and the French and New Orleans and all those cultures coming together, and later on the cultures coming in from Africa, all that mixing together right in this city that wasn't a city. It was a 10-mile square planted there and called the federal government. And within that area, it was truly a crossroads of all kinds of music. But to be specific about your question, the Howard Theater was the sister theater to the Apollo. And I just posted on my Facebook page, which I've just started. I posted as I said, this my first album by B.B. King that I bought when I was 13 years old, and B.B. King was one of those guys I saw at the Howard Theater, along with Bobby Blue Bland and Ray Charles and Jackie Wilson and the Coasters and the Hank Ballard and the Midnighters and all these people that were both in rhythm and blues and jazz, the mixture between rhythm and blues and jazz at the Howard Theater. Ike and Tina Turner, their first review. I got their very first album, and it was just a tremendous influence on me to hear these performers, and just to hear David Fathead Newman on sax with Ray Charles, Marjorie Hendricks with Ray Charles, all these great arrangements and the music too. They all had small bands where they usually had a trumpet and a couple of saxes, an alto and a tenor. Little Richard, of course, would have that big honking sax section, that they have a baritone and a couple of tenors in it to get that rhythmic low end growl going on in all the music. And so it was really interesting time too in the late 50s, because you had the influences of coming out of the 40s and 30s of the big band jazz being whittled down to small combo, but yet the they still reflected a lot of the arrangements in the blues, like Bobby Blue Bland or B.B. King, and the harmonic content of the arrangements of the songs and the sax sections. So it was really an interesting time, and I played a lot of that music in the clubs, in the club circuit that I was involved with in D.C. and from say age 15 on.
Can we break down that club scene? I'm fascinated with the regionalism that once existed in our country before interconnection. I read somewhere where you were in high school and you'd wind up the next day in class and you'd be backing up the Little Anthony and the Imperials from the night before. What were the clubs that you were primarily playing at?
Well, there was different clubs. It depended on the music we were playing. There was the club scene was where the adults went, so to speak. It didn't necessarily reflect everything that came out in the pop world. Mm-hmm. It was some of them were almost like little mini Las Vegases. I mean, you wore tuxes, you did 5 sets a night, you did a lot of Louis Prima. You didn't do any of your own music, though, but you did a lot of Louis Prima. Almost all the bands had sax sections in it, of the rhythm and blues clubs. You played Ray Charles, Louis Prima. You played Bobby Blue Bland. You played music that wasn't associated with the pop music on the radio, like My Doggy in the Window or something like that.
Right.
It was a lot more nitty gritty scene, and through that scene, I met various musicians that got me gigs that gave me a great training in that period of time. But that being said, you go over a couple of streets from 14th Street over to 10th Street, and I remember one of the first gigs that Jorma Kaukonen and I had when I was 14 and a half or 15 and he was 17. We opened up to Link Ray.
Wow.
I mean, how cool is that when you're 14 and a half years old?
Yeah.
And so you heard Link Ray do the really early precursor to distortion, simple chord rock and roll played on a guitar. And don't forget, Lake Ray, all that stuff was instrumental, which was highly unusual at the time, too. You had only one other guy that really did a lot of that, and that was Dwayne Eddy.
All right, you're really painting this beautiful, so what you're saying is melodic improvisation was not hip at that time at all.
No, this is pre that. There wasn't a lot of improvisation. I mean, that came so much later. You listen to the early Link Ray stuff. What it was raw. It didn't have, as a matter of fact, it had the opposite to that. It was a lot of chordal work with simple melodies going on in it, but it had that raw for coming out of the white environment mixed with rockabilly. You had Gene Vincent going on at the same time. I had Carl Perkins up coming out of the South. But what was interesting about Link Ray is he sort of took those influences because they were all country boys, but he put the emphasis on that rawness of the guitar, and that sound is it's not like a distortion sound that came later on, the layers upon layers. And it just had that primitive sound.
That's all I'm striving for, man, is just primitive music. And you're right. What about some of the upright jazz cats? I mean, did you get? I kind of in my intro was riffing on that, but did you get off on guys like Chambers and Garrison?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
I'd listened to a lot of Scotty LaFaro. I listened to Charlie Mingus a lot, but I got to see them. All this was compressed into just a few years. Here in 1957, I'm 13 years old, and 57, 58, 59, when you had the rhythm and blues guys, you had Ray Charles and the Coasters and Hank Ballard and the Midnighters and that sort of raw stuff that was raunchy lyric-wise as well. All that sort of went away at the beginning of the '60s when the payola scandal hit and the conservative hammer came down on the racy lyrics and whatnot. And this music wasn't available everywhere. There was one soul radio station in D.C. that played that kind of music. But then all of a sudden, in the early '60s, you had Pat Boone doing Little Richard, and it was very cautious, very very cleaned up. But what happened in the late '50s and the early '60s was a whole new wave of jazz that came in with Paul Chambers and Horace Silver and Charles Mingus and Eric Dolphy and Yusef Lateef and all these people in the early '60s, and my musical sensibilities moved over to that because that hardcore rhythm and blues, rock and roll stuff, both from the white and black artists, was kind of like snuffed out on you just didn't hear it recorded anymore like that. But on the other hand, in the jazz world, it was really it was really coming alive with really interesting jazz music, and so I got involved with that. I never really played jazz well. I fooled around with it somewhat, but what I got from the jazz was the drive to try to get your own tone on the instrument and to work with that tone and develop your own style and your own sound. Because when you heard Charles Mingus, and I would park my chair right in front of his bass. It was just massive, Here I'm a little 16-year-old guy, just sitting there listening to it. Just the tone that came out of the instrument was just unbelievable. I was floored by hearing Eric Dolphy play the baritone clarinet. It was just unbelievable. You had Roland Kirk that would stuff 3 instruments in his mouth, but make good music. I mean, it was a wild time for jazz.
Jack, I being a non-musician, I mean, were they, like when you talk about that creativity, especially with the bass players, were they playing against the time? I mean, was there something that made it so? Because they were not playing your traditional blues scales. What were they doing that was just?
No, not at all. And those musicians were listening to a lot of different music as well.
Right.
So, you got the reflection of what they absorbed as they tried to put it back out in a fashion that was unique. And like I say, I didn't start playing bass till I was 16. I started playing guitar when I was 12. So when I was in a lot of these bands, I was playing guitar and then later on I started playing bass at age 16 in 1960. So what I got from the musician, fortunately, I didn't really go to hear a bass player or go to hear you went to hear the various people, but when you absorb the music, you absorb the music as music. So if it happened to be from the lower end of the orchestra, that's so be it. If it was the middle or the upper, that's the way it was. So it was much bigger than just the individual instruments. But of course there was John Coltrane and Wes Montgomery with the Montgomery brothers. I heard Monk Montgomery, was one of the first jazz bassists to work with Wes Montgomery that played a Fender Precision. That, of course, was sacrilege in the jazz world.
Right.
And he got so much flack from that. It was the beginning of a different sound. But when I go and hear James Brown, and I'm talking the first album they put out was James Brown. That around that period of time with James Brown at the Apollo, he was at the Howard, and I'd hear the bassist that would be playing with him, Fender bassist. That's really changed the sound of a lot of the rhythm and blues, because that sound was so articulate, and of course it was a bass guitar. It wasn't a bass violin. So therefore, you got different kinds of notes and syncopation, and it started to play a different role with the drummers, than the stand-up bass. But you absorb it all, and hopefully you take it all as music.
Yeah, actually, Monk Montgomery, part of the Master Sounds. I've always asked questions to guys like David Grisman, people like that, who was the first cat that recorded with the electric bass. And to my knowledge, it was Monk Montgomery, 1953 with Art Farmer. I'm sure people fooled around with it before, but I think that was the first one on a recording that ever played the electric bass.
Well, there's a lot of guitar players in D.C. area. So Wes Montgomery is really popular there. You had Charlie Bird that set up shop there and did his classical fingerstyle approach to jazz that opened everything up. And along those lines, you had a variety of guitarists and influences coming up through the country field, that played in the area, and it was just a terrific area. My good friend Danny Gatton, who has passed away many years ago, but he was a phenomenal young guitarist, a year younger than I. That's how I started playing bass. We used to trade positions in all the bands when one guy couldn't make it or he double booked himself or something. And so Danny called me up when I was, I don't know, I was just turned 16 or something, and said his bassist, and he had a 2-week gig, which was big news, and I think it was at the Dixie Pig, and he said, my bassist is really ill, can you play bass? And I said, I've never played bass, Danny. He says, and he laughed. He says, "How hard can it be? It's got 4 strings." So anyway, I borrowed the other gentleman's bass while he was ill during a period of time, and I started playing it. And right afterwards, it was a precision bass. And the neck was a little hard for me to handle on the size of the neck. And that very year, Fender had come out with a jazz bass with a more narrow nut at the top and a little different configuration with the pickups. So I ordered that right in 1960, and with concentric pots, so you control the 2 pickups. Got a Fender Bassman amp, and I was up and running. I really enjoyed the bass, and also the cello was and has been one of my favorite orchestral instruments, and I just love the way you could go up in the higher registers on that instrument and have it really sound sweet. So that started me off playing bass. I was playing bass and guitar for a long time, both in different gigs, until I came out to California and joined the Jefferson Airplane right after it had gotten together. And
we're not going to rush. We're not going to rush any of this. We're going to go to a break. Jack, hang tight. Don't lose us. We're going to come right back. We're going to come right back on the Jake Feinberg Show. Welcome back inside the studios of KEVT Power Talk, 1210 a.m. here in Sahuarita, Tucson. Welcome back, Jack Casady. It's great to have you here, brother.
Thank you for having me.
Jack, I've asked a lot of cats about this, Terry Haggerty and John Perry Barlow, other people like this, and I wanted to ask you about, we live in a pretty a society that demagogues the use of psychedelics and drug use in general, and I just wanted you to talk about your experiences using psychedelics and how it put you, well, just how it changed you as a person and how it affected your music.
Well, I have mixed feelings about a lot of that, but it definitely, there was a period of time when you felt like you had the experience, or whether it was a listening experience from the audience point of view, because we were all in the audience when we weren't playing, during those periods of time in a small city of San Francisco, and of course, some of the experiences have nothing to do with music whatsoever. They're just the experience itself. But I think in its best mode, you got the feeling that you could perhaps concentrate on something or a piece of music or hear something you didn't hear before. I used to talk to some people that envisioned, fantasized that they could play or do certain things by taking the drug. Just they could visualize in their fantasy being creative or doing something creative. It was later on after they came down. It was tough to talk to them that a good few years of woodshedding and practicing our craft is really what puts you in a position to take advantage of anything that might come along like that. There's no doubt there were some experiences that were great, and if not particularly remembered. I think there were certain areas where you felt like it opened up your sonic landscape, so to speak, and less inhibitions, or maybe you could stay on a creative track, within a with a fairly loose structure. But I feel that you're always in music as a musician trying to get to that spot in that zone. The issue with drugs, though, is that I think, like so many things like that, the drug itself takes over, the experience takes over, and takes precedent over whatever it is that you thought you would get to by having that experience. I think you have to keep your goals in mind of what they are rather than just free form. But that being said, I had some pretty good experiences with it. But just for, I would say it didn't, from 1966 to, I don't think I took anything past 1972.
No, I was just,
I don't think even past 1970. I think maybe 4 or 5 years at the most.
You said before, I read somewhere where you were talking, going back to the British invasion when the Beatles came in, and you were a little despondent.
That had to do with that was totally with the club scene in D.C. The scene, you get up to a certain state, but unless you wrote your own material, and in those days, you didn't have bands until we got out to San Francisco that were all equal. You had leader sideman, which could be a very cutthroat music business situation. So unless you were a leader and you wrote your own songs, and you did that, and if you did and you made it, often you'd go into the studio and you wouldn't use the people you'd been playing with anyway. You'd be produced by somebody. So what changed? That got to be very despondent when 63, 64, 65, and went to college, and I really I was kind of floundering in the music world, because if you went into the club scene, they required you to play whatever was being played or even popular. And as the Beatles and Stones began to get traction, and the British invasion got traction in the early 63, 64, 65, then you were playing basically what was popular, what was playing on the radio, and you didn't get a chance to really create your own stuff. So that was a tough period, and I didn't want to go any further down that road, but I didn't really have a vehicle that was a healthy environment to create and write your own music. It wasn't encouraged in any of the clubs, that's for sure.
Right.
And when I went out to California, I found all these people, quite a few of them weren't so-called professional musicians with a lot of training, but they certainly had the gusto, and you find bands with a variety of different abilities and backgrounds of music, but when they came together, it was all for one for all, and everybody generally, at least with the Jefferson Airplane, and I think the Grateful Dead as well, and some of the other bands, we broke ground by signing a contract where everybody's name was on a contract as an equal member, and that made everybody contribute. Now, I'm not a singer or a songwriter, but I contributed with trying to do as creative bass work as I could to enhance those songs. I wrote some songs, but not many. So everybody had a spot to play and a role to play, and I was encouraged, and it was a good thing, and it was changed my life for sure.
That's beautiful.
That being said,
yeah.
I ran into some people some musicians that I'd known in D.C. back when I was in my late teens and early 20s, and they said they remembered, and said, gave me fond compliments about the way I played, but then they turned to me and said, Jack, you never did play any of the music like the record.
That's right. No, I mean, that sort of leads into my next question. There's so much... there's so many tools. You mentioned Facebook earlier, but I mean, just in the music realm, there's just so many tools out there today. And I just wanted you to talk about, with Jorma specifically, the advice or just kind of how you and Jorma create organically. Throw away the book, if there ever was a book. And, if you could give an example, I don't know if it was, I know you produced Qua, or that album, or any specific examples of where something came about, it was just completely organic. The fact is, I just want younger cats to trust in themselves, that inherently they have it in their own constitution to break, as you said, break new ground.
Well, often you don't realize you're doing that when you're doing it. You don't set out to do that. You set out to make some music that makes sense to you. With Jorma, we based everything, even with the airplane, I base everything on songs. My ideas come through songs. I really don't enjoy great, long instrumental extravaganzas. I get my ideas through the melodies of the songs and construction of the songs, and then I try to work different inroads into that. So to break it down to its most basic, Jorma plays folk songs. He writes folk songs. But what he does is he writes interesting lyrics because of his experiences and his ability to articulate a great command of the language. That in turn folds over into how I would play bass and would make me work with that kind of language. He's a songwriter first, and I think a guitarist second, and he said that. And that's, I think, because we keep that perspective. We're not trying to outdo ourselves with instrumental extravaganza as much as make music that makes sense for that song at that time. Now, then that will take you sometimes when the communication happens properly and you're both allowing yourself to hear each other and feed off of that, and then it will take the performance of the song and the construction and arrangement in a different way. So, I don't. One of the ways that we work together all these years is I don't really try to take that from Jorma. He never tries to command what I play, and I never try to get into his area in order to say, well, I want to be able to write some lyrics too, man.
Right.
That's I think you have to know your roles and then really work with them, and that's what makes you complement each other in a positive way.
Did you?
And we still try to do that today. I mean, Jorma's got his own career as Jorma Kaukonen. He performs solo. He'll perform with other people. He just released a brand new album on Red House. He's, we do all that, and when he and I come together as Hot Tuna, whether it's the basic duo Hot Tuna with Jorma and I, or we have other people play with us in various combinations, it's different because that's what happens. When Jorma's playing the guitar, I'm playing the bass, and I call it the ghost. It's like a triangle forms then, and then there's that ghost that comes up between you that is the combination of both those people.
Well, I mean, just having a ball here with Jack Casady. He's live in the UK right now. Someone passed along a note to me that you were recently at Terrapin Crossroads, telling stories with Philip Lesh, and
right. What fun!
I can't imagine, but I'm curious as to, why do you think it's important, aside from just making sure that the history goes on? I mean, I just had Mike Clark and Bill Vitt, two great drummers from the Bay Area, jazz guys, and there's been a lineage breakdown in the last few generations, including mine, and some of that has to do with electronic music. But as far as going back to the source, I mean, we've talked, in the first part of this interview about all your the mentors you had and the fact that you went back to the 40s and you were and somehow younger cats have not been gone far enough back. And I'd like you to talk about why you and Phil do that stuff, aside from the obvious, we want to pass on the torch. I mean, what is the significance of getting up there and waxing poetic about these stories?
Well, it was interesting because Tom Rebecki, a great instrument maker, luthier up in Hillsburg, California, I had commissioned a year and a half ago to make an acoustic bass guitar that was something totally different, because there's very few acoustic bass guitars that sound like anything on their own. You still want to plug them in. And I asked him to make a handmade bespoke instrument dedicated to my late wife, who passed away in September of 2012. So that's another whole story. But he made this instrument, and it's just gorgeous, and I'm using it now in acoustic Hot Tuna. But I was passing through up there, and I noticed as I was fishing about, I was going to have 3 days up there while I was doing some tweaking on the instrument, and I noticed that Phil was playing there for 2 days, and I thought, oh, great! I haven't seen him play in so long, and since I think when she, I don't know, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
So I was up there alone, and of course now I am alone in life, so to speak,
right,
without my wife. And so it was here I find myself 71 years old, and I've got a couple of nights off, and I thought, okay, I heard my wife talking, I was kind of pulling on my earlobe from heaven above and saying, go out and engage, because I've had a rough 2.5 years. So I went in to see him, and of course he greeted me with such great love and friendship and open arms, and he was doing this. He was playing 2 nights. So I think he was presenting music from 1973 one night, 1974 the next. Their set list.
Sure.
And he had a great bunch of local musicians who were playing with him. You can look up, those of you who want to see who was playing that night, please go right ahead. And so I was asked to join Phil on stage, of which he had been doing and giving a little precursor, question and answer from the stage. So it was a lot of fun. He and I mean, we could have done this all night long, of course, if we wanted to really keep blabbing, and it was interesting, the kinds of things we remembered, and we were giving questions and answered them, but often strayed from those questions. But it was a fascinating opportunity, just for he and I to remember things as we remembered them, and share those remembrances of a certain period of time that was very fond for both of us. We're young. I'm 21. He's a couple of years older than me. When I start in San Francisco, I'm 21. I think he's 24, and we're still young and learning the instruments. And we're everybody was visiting everybody else's band and sitting in with everybody else's band back in the day for those first 5 years. When everybody got more famous, more busy, and everything mushroomed up, your time wasn't your own anymore. But you weren't working that much. Everybody, you worked in town, and then quite often you weren't working. So you got a chance to hear all the other musicians that were in town and appreciate them. And we were talking a little bit about the fact that in D.C., you do that, and the bands would come in to hear another band. They'd line up against the wall, with a stance, and they look like they were machine gun people. Particularly the better the band was, the more solemn they were. And I was laughing and joking about the fact that there was the old tales of a guitar player learned a new lick and he turned to the wall so the other guys couldn't see it. And but none of that existed out in San Francisco. It was very open. Everybody really rooted for the other band. When they played better, it just made you want to go back with your own band and work some more. So it was a unique period of time, I'd say, from '65 to '70 in that regard.
Well, I want to just as we wrap up here, Jack. I want to have you back on the program. I think that
anytime you want.
No, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm 37 and I have a family. It's and I I'm pulling for you. Just work through this time with this process with your wife, because there's more chapters to be written, and you've given a lot of quality music while staying grounded and really not being surrounded by sycophants. What you and Jorma crank out every year at the Fur Piece or with Hot Tuna. I'm not going to say I'm an aficionado, but what I do know is authenticity. And you guys are real human beings. Same with Lesh, and we just have a lot more to get to. So much love, man. Thank you for taking the time. We'll get this going again. Hopefully, when you're back in the U.S. of A.
Yes, well, I'm coming. I'm just here for a month, and then we go. If you go on hottuna.com or jackcasady.com or jormakaukonen.com, you will see our tour list. I go right from here in the middle of 15th of June to Hawaii. That's a tough gig, and we're going to do 6 concerts there. And we come back after 2 weeks, and then we're out all of July and August and a whole bunch in September. And then November and December. So we're working a lot this year, and enjoy it more than ever. It's always a surprise, and it's always intense on stage. I love it.
Thank you, Jack. We'll be in touch, my friend.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
All right. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you all again next week. Peace.
Likes to play the blues. And I like for everybody to get together and all of us play the blues. Let's have a good time. Because blues is where it's at. I'm telling you, I love it. I can't help but play it. So when you wake up in the morning,
you're a gig.
And ain't got no money, or no gig, whatever you call it, you ain't got nothing but the blues no way, baby. Or either the old lady gonna do yagging and you and arguing with you, telling you what you get up and do something. Go to the steel mill, and you know you're going to see, and that's usually the blues too. So sometimes you really don't know what to do, and when you get worried, all you can do is reach and grab your harmonica and try to play the blues a little bit. Here's the blues.
Here we go.